People generally believe they are the true agents of action and subsequently feel responsible. They believe they can change the world and eventually control thoughts and events, a control that never truly existed. In the process of understanding, individuals go through many difficulties and changes, which they call unhappiness. During these periods of unhappiness, they think that to be happy they must improve themselves. This leads them to take a series of self-improvement courses, obtaining only limited results, which leads to more frustration. Instead, they could realize that things happen spontaneously. This would change the entire basis of their life. Events that happen through any body-mind mechanism are always beyond the control of this separate entity. But most do not see this. They believe they have mastery over actions and yet continue to feel extremely unhappy. Understand, our true nature has no need, and that is true renunciation. Well, first tell me, what do you understand as free will? Normally, free will is the notion that I can choose between one thing or another. But does this include the consequences of what you choose? Is your free will choosing between one thing or another? But does your free will include what will happen after making that choice? Certainly you can choose, but whether what you choose happens or not is beyond your control. Well then, observe. What is the utility of this free will? The question is, who is involved in this? The self is involved in this. And the big joke is that the identified self wants to free itself. It wants to achieve awakening and enjoy this enlightenment, which cannot happen except through the annihilation of that same self. The supposed authorship of the actions of the self is nothing more than an illusion. The case is that no one has free will. Free will is an illusion. And if you identify with the ego, you are hearing this while interpreting your body-mind organism. So this conversation may seem terribly restrictive. If you have no choice and no freedom, this sounds very limiting. The confrontation is your individual experience, which is apparently full of freedom. It always seems that you have control. You are 100% correct. But at the end of the day, analyze all the events you've been through, and you'll come to the conclusion that you had no control over the events. And you can use this analysis for any action. And at the end of the day, if you analyze yourself deeply, you will discover that your actions were not your actions. So you come to a conclusion that no action is really yours. If you do this day after day, a question should arise from the depths of your being. What if I'm not doing anything? Then who is this I? And if it's not the self that does everything, who is this someone who seems to exist and seems to do? This is Ramana Maharshi's question. Who am I? And if the ego doesn't exist, then what exists? It is only the source that exists. The source is everything. That is what exists when you are not there as a doer. The same conclusion reached through personal experience. And to understand this, as it is not necessary to renounce our activities. Fulfilling our common daily activities without the sense of authorship of actions is the best preparation for enlightenment to happen. Consciousness produced this play, consciousness wrote the script, consciousness is interpreting all the characters, consciousness is witnessing. This is a one-man show. Separation is absence of love. Love is absence of separation. And before, during, and after the illusion of existence, there is only one reality. And the ego is always restricted. Our only freedom is freedom from this limitation, freedom from the ego. The ego is the personal sense of authorship in actions. Therefore, freedom ultimately is freedom from the sense of personal authorship. Accepting this is to free oneself from personal involvement. Personal involvement is the cause of unhappiness. And freedom is understanding the fact that whatever is happening is beyond anyone's control. And whatever is happening is simply seen as something that should happen, and not because of the will of some individual. Total freedom is the total understanding of who I am not, the one who does. It is the deep understanding that I am not the agent. the doer. My final understanding of Advaita. Real life is acceptance. The acceptance of what is, whatever it may be. The acceptance of whatever is in the present moment is non-duality in action. Acceptance includes accepting that it is not I who is doing something. Be aware of the teaching and do not allow it to take control of you. Accept the teaching, but do not allow it to hold you hostage. That is, do not think that acceptance or non-action is an instrument you can use. Let acceptance happen. Do not get involved. Enlightenment means that everything is a constant happening. So there is an acceptance of all actions as part of the functioning of totality. And what changes is the attitude, the perspective, the understanding. The world continues and will continue the same. This spontaneous way of living is described by Lao Tzu in a very beautiful way. And by the way, Ramana Maharshi never heard of Lao Tzu. He never heard of Taoism. But it's absolutely incredible how parallel the teachings of these two are. And they have to be, because the type of life that begins after enlightenment has to be the same. And the life of a sage is always a courageous life. And not through a confrontation with it, but on the contrary, through acceptance. And this change is the basis of life. And a courageous life does not mean confrontation with nature, but a joyful cooperation with the principles of its functioning. And when you hear about those who have achieved this, the sages, you are struck by great admiration and understand how you make your choices. On what basis do you sit to make your decisions? And who chooses what you choose? The ego chooses. Yes, but on what basis does the ego choose? My point is that the ego makes its choice based on the programming it received, the conditioning of the surrounding environment over which you had no choice, and the DNA or genes over which you had no choice, plus the conditioning received from your environment over which you had no choice. Well, so these two things that I call programming with which you will make your choice. If you make your choices based on what you have been conditioned to think is right or wrong, and therefore if your free will is based on programming which you had no control over, then what free will are we talking about? And the free will that you value so much is based on something over which you have no control. I return to the question of ego. Living in society, I am expected to make choices. And shouldn't I make choices? And I answer you, of course, yes. But what I'm saying is for you to consider this question. Is the choice you make really your choice, or does this choice happen? Everything happens naturally and spontaneously. It just happens. And therein lies the magic and wonder of it all. There is no I, only the deep conviction, Father, thy will be done, not mine. With this attitude, there is the absence of the personal agent, I, in any activity. And this way of living becomes naturally virtuous. Then enlightenment happens. And what can happen to the body-mind mechanism after this is impossible to say. There are no rules, and nothing may happen to the body-mind organism, and everything may continue exactly as before. Or something may change. There are some who never wrote and start writing, others who feared public speaking and afterwards start giving lectures. It's all just flowing naturally. It's a kind of miracle. And it's all part of the functioning of manifestation. Everything is a dream, and there is no individual beyond an appearance in consciousness. And when you see the void, you see only the impersonal functioning of the manifestation that simultaneously, spontaneously arose from the unmanifest. And the totality of all things came from nothing. And the only truth that is not a concept is a sense of presence, here and now. And this impersonal sense of presence in the present moment is the only truth. In this transformation with the disappearance of the I, of the person, of the who, and that is all that needs to be understood. The rest is unnecessary. And what remains? Consciousness, that which has always been. The divine platform, consciousness, totality, the true one subject, the potential nothing, God, or whatever name you give to it. If you go to the void, all these words are meaningless. Limitations enlightenment, knowledge, all this is nonsense. You don't need it. But if the individual thinks he is an individual, then more words are needed. Enlightenment is just the understanding that there is no individual trying to understand anything. It is a surrender where there is no surrender of someone. And it is not related to the subject-object event triangle. It is just a pure and simple understanding where there is no longer someone understanding. What I'm saying is that understanding is vertical. There is only a flash of understanding in which the subject disappears. This understanding happens at the appropriate time for each one, and no one can know when it will be. All I can say is that it doesn't happen when there are expectations. That is while there is an I, a me, waiting for it. The basic conflict in life is that I always do everything right, so I want my reward. They do wrong things, so they deserve to be punished. This is very simple. If you analyze any action that you consider to be your action today, you will discover that it is just a reaction of the brain, a response to an external event over which you have no control. A thought that comes, and you have no control over the thought that comes. Something that is seen or heard, and you have no control over what you will see or hear next. And all these events happen without your control. So, what happens? The brain reacts to what is thought, or to the thing that is seen, heard, tasted, smelled, or touched. And the mental reaction is what you call my action, but in fact, this is merely a concept. And if you are simply the witness of the thought, the brain does not react, so there is no action. This, as Muslims say, Inshallah is the will of God that happens through a person, or in the words of the Buddha, events happen, actions are done, but there is no individual who acts. I can really sum it all up in one sentence. Thy will be done, not mine.